Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The garage was supposed to be a simple Saturday chore, a clear out to make room for a new lawn mower, but the discovery I made there marked the beginning of the end for my marriage. Diane and I had built a life together over nearly a decade. On paper, we had it all: shared routines, movie nights, weekend getaways, and even those easy silences that settled between us in the evenings. I always assumed she'd felt the same contentment, the same sense of peace in the life we'd carved out. Looking back now, I wonder if I was simply too naive or if she was that good at hiding her true self. That Saturday, as I sorted through old boxes, I stumbled across a suitcase I hadn't seen before. At first, I thought it must be more of the usual: clothes, old papers, things she'd forgotten about. But when I opened it, what I saw made me freeze. Inside was a collection of souvenirs, keychains, postcards, little trinkets from cities Diane had never mentioned visiting. Some bore the names of places she'd told me she had no reason to go to. My heart hammered as I sifted through them, piecing together a puzzle I didn't want to believe. Diane traveled frequently, thanks to her job in pharmaceuticals. She would leave for what she claimed were conferences and work events, and I'd never thought twice about it. But now, seeing these reminders of trips she'd never talked about, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a lot more to the story. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell myself there had to be an explanation. But something deep inside told me that things were about to get much worse. Over the next few days, I tried to ignore the gnawing thoughts, to pretend that nothing was wrong. But the doubt lingered, a persistent itch that demanded I dig deeper. Late one night, while Diane was sleeping, I finally gave in and opened her laptop. Her email was already logged in, a fact that felt almost like a trap she'd laid, assuming I'd never bother to check. With my heart pounding, I began to scroll, scanning through the messages for any hint of the truth. At first, there was nothing alarming. Work emails, family updates, the usual. But then I stumbled on an email thread from someone named Jeremy. The messages started off innocent enough, talking about work, mutual colleagues, the kinds of things you'd expect between coworkers. But as I scrolled down, the tone shifted. Jokes that were too personal, inside references I didn't understand, and then, messages about looking forward to the next time. My throat tightened as I read on, trying to deny what I knew was true. I remember that night vividly. I felt numb, like the walls of our life together were closing in, crumbling under the weight of her betrayal. But even as the evidence piled up, a part of me wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, to find some way this could all make sense. But as I read on, that hope faded with each word. They weren't just messages, they were a glimpse into a life she was living without me. I sat there, in the dim light of our kitchen, reeling from the truth. Diane had been visiting Jeremy for years. Every time she claimed to be on a work trip, she'd been with him, lying to me without a second thought. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt, but I kept reading, needing to know everything. I found dates, locations, hotel confirmations, all of it meticulously planned to fit into the fabric of her work life. She had been careful, but not careful enough. The worst part came next. I found messages between Diane and her daughter, Sonia, who had known about the affair for at least 2 years. In one message, Diane had told Sonia exactly what to say if I asked where she was. Reading those words, I felt a new wave of anger, a sense of betrayal from someone I had helped raise, who had been in on the lie all along. I thought about all the times Sonia had reassured me when Diane was gone, her easy lies a stark reminder of just how deeply my trust had been abused. In the weeks that followed, I felt like I was living in someone else's life. Every moment with Diane felt tainted, false, as though I were looking at a stranger. She didn't notice anything was wrong, didn't suspect that I knew her secrets. I suppose she thought she had me fooled, that I was still the trusting husband who wouldn't question her. But beneath my silence, I was unraveling, piecing together every moment of our life with the knowledge that it was built on lies. I didn't confront her right away. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand an explanation. But another part of me held back, knowing that a confrontation would change everything. I wanted to be sure of my next steps, to plan my exit carefully. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing that she had broken me. So, I went through the motions, pretending that everything was normal, all while preparing to walk away. One night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, my mind racing with all the things I wanted to say to her. I wanted to tell her that I knew, that I had seen through every lie she'd spun. I wanted to tell her how much she had destroyed, not just our marriage, but every memory, every moment that I had held dear. But in the end, I kept quiet, waiting for the right moment to make my move. The weeks passed, each one more excruciating than the last, as I bided my time. She still traveled, still came home with her stories of conferences and work dinners, unaware that I knew the truth. I played my part, pretending that everything was fine, that I was still the husband she thought she had fooled. But with every passing day, my resolve grew stronger, fueled by the knowledge that soon, I would leave her behind and start a new life free from her lies. And so, I waited, knowing that the time would come when I could finally walk away, leaving her to face the ruins of what she had done. The longer I held on to the secret, the more the weight of it pressed down on me, turning every day into an agonizing charade. Each morning I'd get up, go through the motions of making coffee, watching her scroll through her phone as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had changed. Every small gesture, a quick kiss goodbye, a simple question about my day, felt twisted, warped by the knowledge that her loyalty lay elsewhere. I had come to know her every lie by heart, had memorized every detail of her deception, and with each moment of silence, I felt myself losing a part of who I was. It was only a matter of time before Diane's oblivion gave way to suspicion. I had never been good at hiding my emotions, and the tension was beginning to show. Diane was no fool. She must have noticed that something had shifted, that I wasn't as responsive, wasn't as invested in her stories about work. When she mentioned another upcoming business trip, I merely nodded, and I saw a flash of something in her eyes, apprehension, perhaps, or maybe even fear. She went anyway, leaving me alone in the house, as she always did. I didn't stop her. I had no intention of revealing that I knew, not yet. Instead, I used the time to take the next step in my plan. I sorted through our financials, made copies of important documents, and began the slow, methodical process of untangling myself from her. I didn't want her to see it coming, didn't want her to have the chance to prepare. On her return, she tried harder than ever to bridge the distance between us, acting warmer, almost cloying in her affection. She cooked my favorite meals, sat beside me on the couch, looping her arm through mine. She even suggested we take a vacation together. Part of me wondered if she felt guilty, if she sensed that she was losing her grip on the life she'd so carefully crafted. But I refused to let her see the bitterness that had settled inside me, the disdain I felt every time she smiled at me, every time she kissed me goodnight. Then there was Sonia. Her daughter, my stepdaughter, had become a constant reminder of the betrayal I couldn't escape. I had always treated her as my own, always been there for her as best I could. She had grown up under my roof, her life intertwined with mine in ways I hadn't even realized until now. And yet, she had known. She had been part of it, lying to my face, covering for her mother while I worked hard to give them both the life they claimed to appreciate. One evening, when Diane was out, Sonia came home early from a friend's house. She looked surprised to find me there alone, sitting in the living room with nothing but a dim lamp casting shadows on the walls. She greeted me casually, but I couldn't bring myself to respond with my usual warmth. I asked her to sit down, my voice steady yet cold. "Sonia," I started, watching her face closely. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She fidgeted, her eyes flicking around the room as if searching for an escape. "What's wrong?" "I know about your mom," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I know about her and Jeremy. And I know you've been covering for her." Her face drained of color, her eyes widening in shock. What? No, I. Don't lie to me, I cut her off. I've seen the messages. I know she's been using you as a cover, and I need you to tell me the truth. For a moment, she sat there, her gaze fixed on the floor. Then, with a barely audible sigh, she nodded. I didn't want to be involved, she whispered, her voice thick with shame. She told me it was just a phase, that she'd end it soon. I didn't know what to do. Her confession brought a strange sense of relief, though it was tainted by the bitterness that had taken root in me. I had loved her like my own, had trusted her, and yet here she was, bound to the same lies that her mother had spun. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation that would make everything right, but I knew better. Sonia was just another casualty in Diane's web, a pawn she'd used to keep her secret safe. I stood up, unable to look at her any longer. This ends now, I said, my voice low but firm. I won't ask you to choose sides, but I need you to understand something. I'm done pretending that everything is fine. Whatever happens next, I need you to know that this isn't on me. It's on her. With that, I left the room, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the silent house. The confrontation had left me drained, yet strangely liberated. For the first time since I had discovered the affair, I felt as though I were regaining some measure of control, as if I had taken a step toward reclaiming my life from the ruin Diane had left behind. The next few days passed in a tense, uneasy quiet. Diane seemed oblivious to the change, wrapped up in her routines, her lies, her endless excuses. I watched her from a distance, no longer the man she thought she knew, biding my time, waiting for the right moment to end it all. I didn't want to give her the chance to explain, to twist the truth into something that suited her. I wanted her to see that I had seen through every deception, every excuse, every lie she'd told to protect her affair. Then, one evening, Diane sat beside me on the couch, her hand resting on mine. I was thinking, she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant. Maybe we should go away for a while. Just the two of us. It could be good for us, you know. I looked at her, her face so close to mine, her expression so earnest that for a brief, surreal moment, I almost believed she was genuine. But then I remembered everything I had found, the messages, the hotel reservations, the souvenirs in that dusty old suitcase. She wasn't suggesting this for us, she was trying to ease her guilt, to paint over the cracks in her own conscience. I pulled my hand away, my voice barely more than a whisper. No, Diane. I don't think that's a good idea. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, quickly replaced by something darker, sharper. What do you mean? I thought we could use some time together. Time won't change what you've done, I replied, my voice colder than I had intended. The color drained from her face as she realized what I meant. Her mouth opened, but no words came out, only the faintest sound of shock, of denial. For the first time, she understood that I knew. I watched her face crumble, saw the mask she had worn so carefully for years begin to slip away. She looked lost, like a stranger in her own skin, a woman exposed for what she truly was. The silence stretched between us, heavy and unbreakable, a chasm that no amount of words could bridge. She reached out, her hand trembling, but I pulled away, standing up, putting distance between us. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I had prepared myself for in every quiet moment of doubt, of anger, of betrayal. I know, Diane, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. I know everything. She collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. I didn't stay to watch her unravel, I had nothing left to say, no more words to give. Instead, I turned and walked away, leaving her to confront the wreckage she had created. After that night, the silence in our house became an almost physical presence. Diane retreated into herself, each day slipping further into quiet desperation. I watched her go through the motions, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She knew her lies had been stripped bare, and there was nothing left to hide behind. But still, she didn't say a word about it. She seemed almost paralyzed, as though admitting the truth out loud would make the whole thing collapse into something even uglier. Sonia tried to keep her distance. She rarely looked me in the eye, her face clouded with guilt whenever we crossed paths. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that this wasn't her fault, but I couldn't bring myself to pretend that everything was okay. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw, and every time I saw her, I was reminded of the role she played in covering for Diane. My silence was its own kind of punishment, for both of us. One Saturday afternoon, when Diane was out, Sonia came into the living room, her expression hesitant. She looked older somehow, the carefree demeanor of her teenage years replaced with something darker, something more aware of the consequences of loyalty. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the floor. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit down. She perched on the edge of the couch, twisting her hands together as if gathering her thoughts. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I know you must hate me. I didn't mean for things to get this far." I thought she would stop. The pain in her voice was genuine, and for the first time, I saw how deeply Diane's actions had affected her as well. Sonia had been forced into a role she hadn't asked for, manipulated by a mother who had used her own daughter to keep her secret safe. "I don't hate you," I said, my tone soft but firm. "But I need you to understand something, Sonia. Trust is a fragile thing. Once it's broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild. I don't blame you for what she did, but you were a part of it. You helped her lie to me, and that's something I can't just forget." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I understand. I was scared. She told me she'd stop, that it was just something she needed to work through. But it kept going, and I didn't know what to do." I looked at her, seeing not just the guilt, but the confusion and fear that had been festering inside her. In that moment, I knew that Sonia was just another victim in this mess, caught between a loyalty to her mother and a bond she'd felt to me. I wanted to forgive her, to let her know that she could still trust me, but I also knew that forgiveness couldn't be forced. "You're young, Sonia," I said finally, my voice steady. "You'll make mistakes. We all do. But I need you to remember something: honesty isn't optional. It's not just about being loyal to the people you love, it's about respecting yourself enough to tell the truth." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this." I placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort I could. "I know. And I don't blame you for what happened. But going forward, I need you to be honest with me, with yourself. You owe yourself that." She left the room, her shoulders hunched, but I could see a weight had been lifted from her. And, in a strange way, I felt a little lighter too. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step toward some kind of peace, a way forward that didn't involve anger or resentment. Days turned into weeks, and Diane's silence grew heavier. She seemed to wither, each passing day stripping away a piece of her confidence, her charm. At first, she tried to carry on as usual, making dinner, asking about my day, but each attempt was met with the same cold distance. I couldn't play along anymore. I couldn't pretend that our life hadn't been built on lies. Finally, one evening, she couldn't take it any longer. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when she walked in, her face pale and drawn. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. I set down the dish I was washing, turning to face her. "Go ahead." She took a deep breath, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice cracking. "I know that doesn't mean much now, but I am. I never meant for any of this to happen. I don't know what I was thinking." I held her gaze, feeling a strange sense of detachment as I listened to her words. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her the chance to explain, but another part of me was numb, indifferent to the apology that came far too late. It went on for years, Diane, I said, my voice low but steady. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice, over and over again, to lie to me, to betray me. Do you understand that? She nodded, her face crumpling. I know. I was selfish. I thought I could have both lives, that I could keep what we had while having something else. I was wrong. More than wrong, I replied, a hint of anger creeping into my voice. You didn't just hurt me. You hurt Sonia. You used her to cover for you, to lie for you. Did you ever stop to think about what that would do to her? She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking as she began to cry. I know. I'm a terrible person. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I can't take it back. I wish I could, but I can't. I felt a surge of frustration, a fury I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. Why, Diane? Why do it? Was it worth it? Was he worth all of this? She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, a hollow look in her eyes. I don't even know anymore. At the time, I thought it would fill something inside me, something that was missing. But now, standing here, I realize I destroyed everything for nothing. The silence that followed was thick with a finality that felt both liberating and crushing. I didn't feel the satisfaction I had thought I would. Her remorse, her brokenness, it was a shadow of the life we had lost, a reminder of everything that could have been if she had chosen differently. I can't do this anymore, Diane, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Whatever we had, whatever we were, it's gone. And I don't think it's something we can ever get back. She nodded, her expression defeated. I understand. I don't blame you. With that, I turned and left the room, feeling the weight of our shattered marriage lift, only to be replaced by the cold emptiness of finality. Diane's apology, her confession, it was too little, too late. There was nothing left to save. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was over, in every sense of the word. I had faced the truth, had confronted Diane, and now, all that was left was to pick up the pieces of my life and move on. The pain would linger, the betrayal a scar I would carry with me, but I knew that I had done everything I could to reclaim my life, to start over. In the darkness, I felt a flicker of hope, a small but steady reminder that I still had a future, a life beyond the wreckage Diane had left behind. And for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of peace, a promise that, one day, I would find happiness again. The finality of it all settled in slowly, like the soft descent of dusk. I could feel myself letting go, each memory of Diane and Sonia, each thought of our shattered life together, drifting further and further into the past. A week had passed since our last conversation, the one where Diane's empty apologies echoed through the hollow space we'd once called a home. She moved out shortly afterward, and just like that, she was gone. I didn't feel relief, only a strange quietness that took root in her absence. Sonia stayed, though we had grown distant. She spent most days at a friend's house or holed up in her room, avoiding me. I tried to reach out a few times, but our conversations remained short, stilted, as if she didn't know who I was anymore. Or maybe it was me who had become a stranger to her. I couldn't be sure. One night, just as I was about to head to bed, I heard a quiet knock on my door. Sonia stood there, her face drawn and pale. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. "Of course," I replied, stepping aside as she entered, her movements slow and hesitant. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her gaze fixed on the floor. For a moment, we sat in silence, and then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I know you're going to sell the house. I understand why, but, it's just, everything feels different now." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the loss we both felt. I hadn't told her yet about my plan to move, but I guess it was obvious. The house was a tomb, filled with memories that seemed too painful to bear. I was ready to leave it all behind, to start fresh somewhere new. "I'm sorry, Sonia," I said, my voice soft. "I know this hasn't been easy for you. None of this has been fair. But I can't stay here anymore. I need to let go." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know. I thought we'd have more time." The sadness in her voice struck a chord deep inside me, a pang of guilt for everything that had happened, for the family we had lost. For a moment, I reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We'll find a way, Sonia. Things will get better. I promise." She nodded, but I could see the pain etched in her face, the doubt that lingered in her eyes. As she left the room, a sense of finality settled over me, a quiet understanding that there was no going back. We were both adrift, clinging to the remnants of a life that had slipped through our fingers. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and meetings with realtors, arranging for the house to be sold, sorting through belongings that I no longer wanted to carry with me. Each item felt like a weight, a reminder of the years I had poured into this life, only to have it crumble before me. I packed up Diane's things, her clothes, her books, her keepsakes, everything she had left behind in her hurry to leave. It felt like a purge, a cleansing of the past that I needed to free myself from. One night, as I was going through old boxes in the attic, I found a small journal tucked away in the corner. It was Sonia's, filled with handwritten pages in her small, neat handwriting. I hesitated, feeling a pang of guilt for even considering reading it, but something compelled me to open it. The entries were sporadic, scattered over the years, detailing moments from her childhood, her teenage years, her dreams, her fears. And then, towards the back, I found an entry from a few weeks ago, shortly after Diane had moved out. As I read her words, my heart sank. "I can't do this anymore. It hurts too much. I know he hates me. He'll never look at me the same way again. I wish I could make it all go away. I wish I could be someone else, someone he could still love." My hands shook as I closed the journal, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a vice. I had been so consumed by my own pain, my own anger, that I hadn't seen the depth of Sonia's suffering, hadn't realized the toll this had taken on her. She had been dragged into this mess, forced to bear the weight of secrets and lies that weren't hers to keep. And now, she was breaking under the strain. I rushed downstairs, calling her name, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. There was no answer. Panic seized me as I searched each room, my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, I found her in her room, curled up on her bed, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Beside her was an empty bottle of pills. "Sonia!" I shouted, rushing to her side, shaking her gently. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, her lips moving in a barely audible whisper. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice faint. "I didn't want to hurt you. I just wanted it to stop." A wave of anguish tore through me as I called for an ambulance, my hands trembling as I held her, whispering words of comfort, promises that everything would be okay. I stayed by her side, my mind racing with guilt, regret, 1,000 words left unspoken. The ambulance arrived, and I watched as they carried her away, my heart breaking with every step. I followed them to the hospital, sitting in the cold, sterile waiting room, my mind numb with fear. Hours passed, each one stretching out into an eternity. I replayed every moment, every missed opportunity to reach out, to let her know that she was still loved, still valued, even in the wake of everything that had happened. Finally, a doctor approached, his face grave. "She's stable, but it was close. She'll need time to recover, both physically and emotionally. I suggest you consider counseling for her, and for yourself." I nodded, relief flooding through me, mingled with the sorrow that had settled deep in my bones. I had come so close to losing her, to letting my own pain blind me to the suffering of the one person I still had left. When I finally saw her, she was lying in a hospital bed, her face pale, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed too heavy for her young shoulders. I sat beside her, taking her hand in mine, the weight of everything we had lost settling over us like a shroud. "I'm so sorry, Sonia," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "I should have been there for you. I should have seen." She looked at me, a flicker of forgiveness in her eyes. "It's not your fault. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to make it stop." We sat in silence, the words we couldn't say hanging in the air between us. The pain, the regret, the unspoken apologies, all of it settled into a quiet understanding, a bond forged in the fires of betrayal and loss. As I left the hospital that night, I felt a profound emptiness, a hollow ache that I knew would never fully heal. Diane's betrayal had taken so much more than our marriage. It had shattered our family, left scars that would take a lifetime to mend. I had wanted revenge, justice, closure. But in the end, all I was left with was the quiet sorrow of a life torn apart, a daughter clinging to the fragments of her own fragile heart. I drove home alone, the darkness pressing in around me, a reminder of the emptiness that would be waiting for me. I had fought so hard to find peace, to start over, but now, as I sat in the quiet stillness of my car, I realized that there was no escaping the shadows of the past. In the end, there was no triumph, no closure, only the weight of a loss that would linger, etched into the fabric of our lives, a quiet sorrow that would follow us wherever we went.